The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to today's presentation from the California Tahoe Conservancy on affordable housing on Conservancy land in South Lake Tahoe. For today's presentation, I'll be your facilitator. My name is Kevin Pryor, and I'm from the California Tahoe Conservancy. In addition to myself, we're going to have two presenters from the Tahoe Conservancy. The first is Jessica Wackenhut Lomelli, and the second is Amy Rutledge, both from the Tahoe Conservancy. In addition to Tahoe Conservancy representatives, we'll have panelist Jonathan Heim from the Department of General Services, who we'll refer to as Department of General Services, referred to as DGS throughout the presentation. In addition, we'll have panelist Meji Tabar from the Housing and Community Development Department of the State of California, or HCD. In addition to the panelists and presenters, we also have online today, we have representatives from the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, as well as the City of South Lake Tahoe, who are here today to help us with any questions and technical items. Before we get into the presentation today, I want to cover a few housekeeping items that help everyone understand how the presentation will work today. As a reminder, all participants are muted via GoToWebinar today. Question and answers from today's webinar will be posted on the Conservancy website that are received via email, phone calls, and throughout the meeting. As a reminder also, if you only call into the meeting, you will not be able to see the presentation slides or provide questions into the question box. The presentation, for viewing purposes, is on the Conservancy webpage and available for download. If you do have additional questions and comments throughout the presentation, we encourage you to submit them through email via info@tahoe.ca.gov. Some additional reminders on question and answers. We will obviously encouraging as many questions and comments as the public feels comfortable presenting during the live presentation. As your facilitator, we'll be monitoring the questions, and in certain points during the presentation, as well as at the end of the presentation, we'll be reading back some of those questions. We encourage everyone who's on the presentation today via GoToWebinar to use the question feature on the right side of your GoToWebinar screen, seen in this photo on the right. Your questions will also then be read into the record by myself, the meeting facilitator. Some additional housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the Conservancy website after the meeting. As a reminder, if you cannot hear the presentation right now, please make sure that your volume on your computer is turned on. In addition, if you're having additional technical issues, we have a Conservancy staff member standing by via phone, and you can reach this person at the following phone number: 530-543-6040. Some additional meeting ground rules. The first is to remind everyone of common courtesy in using appropriate language. Secondly, all ideas and points of view have value. You may not always agree with your neighbor, but if you do disagree, providing an alternative to points is preferred. Number three, which is probably the most important today, is lead with patience. Due to COVID-19, we are all adjusting our community engagement through online platforms and learning those as quickly as we can. Also, as a reminder, at the end of today's presentation, we'll have an optional survey that we encourage all participants to complete. This survey at the end will help better tailor future engagement opportunities. In addition to the optional survey, we will also have a pop-up poll that will be presented during the meeting presentation as well. So thanks for your patience on the meeting ground rules and housekeeping items. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica from the Tahoe Conservancy.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I'm going to get started by going over our agenda. So we have quite a few things on the agenda today. but I'm excited about what we're going to be able to talk about and hear some of your input. So we're going to start with some introductions, have an overview of what we're talking about today, do a slight data walk to understand what are some of the housing needs in South Shore, go over a timeline for this project, address some of the community input that we've already received, have the next steps for this project, and then address any questions. But as Kevin mentioned, we're also going to have about halfway through, we're going to be able to address some of those questions as well. Great. So as for the goal for this meeting, we really wanted to think about how we're including the community in this process and letting them know about some of the housing needs in South Shore, the demographics, and the two particular parcels of land that we're focusing on at the Y that are currently under the state's executive order for affordable housing. And also thinking about the next steps for community engagement and how we're going to take the community along this process. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a step back to talk a little bit more about the Tahoe Livable Communities program at the Conservancy. So in 2013, the Tahoe Livable Communities program was created and adopted by the Conservancy board. We have three main goals, which you see here on this slide. The first is to acquire and restore aging developed properties on environmentally sensitive lands and retire or transfer the development rights to town centers. The second goal is to sell, lease, or exchange vacant Conservancy land in these town centers. The third goal is to acquire the remaining private properties in several of Lake Tahoe's roadless subdivisions to remove the threat of development. Next slide, please. And within the Tahoe Livable Communities program at the Conservancy, we do have a set of properties that we refer to as the asset lands. We currently have 17 asset lands that were adopted by our board in March 2014 and are in the urbanized centers of Myers, Kings Beach, and at the Y. So you can see here on this slide that we have, in the darker orange, it's all the Conservancy land that is owned, and the lighter blue pieces of property, those are considered our asset lands. So on the lower portion of the slide, those two are the ones that we'll be focusing on today. These parcels are not environmentally sensitive, and they are developable and in town centers. And for those of you who are not as familiar, what town centers are is they were designated by TRPA around the lake. And what TRPA found was that these town centers were significant sources of sediments and other contaminants that were entering Lake Tahoe. So the idea is to target these areas for redevelopment, to improve the environmental conditions, to increase the sustainability, create less auto-centric development, and enhance more walkable neighborhoods and economic opportunity. So of course, these asset lands, another positive about them is we're really aligning with state planning priorities like SB 375 for more efficient land use patterns and thinking about how transportation connects peoples to jobs and their housing. So again, these are the different asset lands, but you can see it is a very select few of the properties that we do own throughout the Y area. Next slide, please. Now I want to get started with sharing some of the data. As some of you may be familiar with, this Tahoe Prosperity came together and they had consultants and formed the Housing Tahoe Partnership. This was a new coordinated approach to understand the housing crisis in the South Shore while developing strategies to create a more positive impact throughout the South Shore region. Over 50 public and private community leaders came to the table to provide their input in addition to the public meetings and surveys that were given. In phase one, the housing needs assessment began in June 2019 and was completed in November of 2019. This was really, part of this phase was gathering a bunch of data to understand who was living in South Shore, what some of the needs were, and increased rent burden. It also looked at some of the programs, education, policies, and opportunities in the South Shore. With phase one, we really built on that to develop phase two, which was a housing action plan. This was recently completed in March 2020, and it will be implemented over the next 6 years, where there's 20 strategies, and the different partners who are part of the Housing Tahoe partnership will be implementing those through their assigned roles and responsibilities. Next slide, please. As a result of the housing assessment plan, we really got a better understanding of what's happening with housing at the South Shore. So a big finding was that 21% of South Shore residents can afford the median house price. The median house price in South Shore is actually $500,000, and rentals average over $1,800 per month. Of the 3,290 housing units that are needed, as proposed by the Housing Needs Assessment, 57% of those housing units that are needed at below market rate. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what below market rate means. So of those, 38% are needed for home ownership and 62% are needed for rental. So below market rate rental levels would range from $500 to $1,250 per month, and that's for renting an apartment or a home. And then also affordable home ownership would range from $200,000 to $400,000 a home. Next slide, please. At our last community meeting, we understood that people may be a little bit confused about what affordable housing is. So I wanted to go a little bit more into that, and then I'll explain the graphic that's on this slide. The Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development defines an affordable house as one that a household can obtain for 30% or less of its income. So in the South Shore, 48% of those who rent and 34% of homeowners are paying over that 30% threshold, which is pretty significant. A household is considered low income if it makes less than 80% of the median income in the local area. This is called the area median income, or AMI. So on this slide, you can see AMI, and that refers to what I just defined. Again, the area median income often does not factor in other expenses that we often have in our household, which include childcare, healthcare, student loans, anything else of that sort. So a good example of someone making less than 80% of the area median income is a new public school teacher. So they would fit into this affordable housing category. And in this slide, you can see that it shows a whole range of things. I do want to point out that in here, the 100% area median income is $71,075. This was done for the Housing Needs Assessment and includes the whole South Shore, including the Nevada side. Next slide, please. I wanted to break it down a little bit more to understand what's happening on the California side. So these demographics were pooled for the zip code 96150. So as you can see, the median income is pretty drastically lower. So in 96150, the median income is $48,653. So the people that would meet the affordable housing threshold in the South Shore on the California side would need to be making under $38,922. And what that comes out to is about making $20 per hour at their current job. As we know, South Shore is actually highly dependent on tourism for our economy, and a lot of people are not able to meet that threshold. So when we think about affordable housing, it's really important to understand who's actually living here, what the needs are, and when we are creating housing, what types of affordability is needed. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jessica. At this point, I want to remind our participants that we do have a question feature on the GoToWebinar that's over to your right side. And we do encourage any type of questions that you may have, especially on the first part of the presentation that Jessica presented. In addition to that, I was notified too that our phone number for anyone that may be having technical difficulties is 543-6028. So I'm monitoring the question box, and I currently don't see any questions that have been posted. Oh, here we have one here. Jessica, which AMI will be used for the housing units you're proposing to build? The AMI for 96150 or El Dorado County?
I'm actually unsure about that right now. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I think it might be 96150, but we'll go more into that later.
Thank you. All right, let's keep going with our next set of slides and presentation.
Hi. So thank you, Jessica, for giving us a great overview of housing needs in the South Shore area. I want to give you an overview of this project and how we got involved and who our partners are. So the executive order that came out last January of 19, Governor Gavin Newsom basically ordered an inventory of all state lands to try and assist statewide with affordable housing. Affordable housing is a crisis in many communities in California, not just South Lake Tahoe. We felt very fortunate that they were interested in partnering with us to help provide capacity for planning and also for providing the land, which I'll talk about in a minute, at a low cost, and to provide funding, advice, and assistance. And this executive order focuses on making sure that pilot projects take place that on state lands to implement affordable housing projects. 50% of any housing that's developed on these projects needs to be affordable. So that would be at the 80% of median income or below. Next slide, please. Some of the things that this executive order and our partnership with the Department of General Services, DGS, and Housing and Community Development, HCD, allow us to do is public and private partnerships. We're very excited that we are working with a fairly large group of very qualified private developers. I'll go more into the process in a few minutes to help make this possible, along with the state agencies, us, Department of General Services, HCD, and local agencies, the City of South Lake Tahoe and Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, to help make this project happen. It's very important that the long-term ground lease can be provided to a developer to help put a project on the ground. This allows the land to be provided at $1 per year for up to 35 years. And that's really important because land in California is extremely expensive. And this also allows us to leverage our state property investment that we had made with bond dollars in the past when we acquired these properties. Our board acknowledged that implementing the community plan and the regional plan and putting housing and mixed-use development in these town centers was a part of acquiring these properties. And we're excited to be able to carry that to fruition through this project. The executive order also talks about using innovative and sustainable construction methods. So that includes energy efficiency. It includes potentially modular construction or other innovative methods that could help save money and time to deliver an affordable housing project for the South Shore. It also talks about equitable construction, and that includes prevailing wage, which is a state rule for paying contractors at a certain level. And it also includes using small, local, women-owned, disabled, veteran-owned businesses to help provide economic development and increase quality of life at the Y. Next slide, please. This is a close-up of the two parcels that we're talking about. So this helps. The earlier map showed the broad picture at the Y and all of our asset lands that are located there. This focuses on the two parcels that will be a part of this project that is subject to the executive order. So as you can see, they're close to the high school. They're right on Lake Tahoe Boulevard and on Tahoe Lane. So they are across Tahoe Lane from each other. They total approximately 12 acres, and there's probably 11 acres of usable land on these parcels. So it's a lot of area, and it's an exciting opportunity to do a really good project for the community. There's also a transit center nearby in the shopping center at the Y intersection. And that's where there's a small kiosk and a covered area. It's a bus station. It's also, there's bus transit to Amtrak trains in Sacramento. And that's an important element of this project because we hope to be able to improve transit service potentially, and also pedestrian safety, and then recreational pedestrian and bicycle access to amenities and other parks in the area. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through just a timeline so people can understand how this project got started, and then where we've come and where we are today and where we're going next. So looking back to the executive order that came out in January of 2019, we just talked about that, and that was the beginning of Governor Newsom's focus on providing affordable housing on state lands. We then replied to that request with our asset lands in the basin. They let us know in September of 19 that they had selected us as one of several pilot projects statewide. And in October of 19, we announced that selection at our board meeting, which was open to the public. Next slide. In November of 19, we did a variety of stakeholder interviews, informal discussions with folks in the community, environmental groups, the school district, apartments across the street from this project, different community groups that are potentially involved in affordable housing and provision of services. That was really interesting. We got some great feedback that helped us prepare for our December 2019, actually it was held on December 11th at South Tahoe High, community meeting. That was hosted by our partners, DGS, HCD, and us. The city of South Lake Tahoe and Tahoe Regional Planning Agency also helped with that meeting. And we were really excited to be in person with you all that day. We were hoping to be in person with you again today, and we're very pleased with the turnout. It's amazing, it's great. I think there's over 70 people that are involved in this right now, and that's exciting. So thank you for coming virtually today. That meeting also had a similar turnout. It was 50 to 70 people. We got really good detailed input about issues people were concerned about. Jessica will go through some of that. And also, everybody put Post-it notes on maps of the parcels for specific ideas. That was really great. We were able to generate very detailed notes from that community meeting that we presented to our board in December, and also that we included in January in our request for qualifications that went out to find qualified developers and create a short list of qualified developers for this project. We were then able to select a short list of qualified developers in February of 2020, and over a dozen developers responded, and that was great. And we have a short list of 9 developers. There are some statewide developers and also some broader developers, and a lot of them have experience in the Tahoe Basin. We specifically used the community input to make sure we were reviewing the projects that these development groups had done in the past to try and match up with the needs in South Lake Tahoe and at the Y to maximize the increase in quality of life that could happen because of this project. So we really want to thank you for your feedback, and we welcome and are excited to get more of it today. And then in March of 2020, right at the end of the month, we released the request for proposals to that short list of developers. And that request had a lot of detailed information about the project and the site, so that, and it also again had the community input attached, so that developers can really give us very good proposals that are tailored to what we want to see at this project at the Y. Next slide, please. So here we are today in April 2020 with you all at this meeting. We're excited that we were able to put this virtual meeting together, and again, I really appreciate your participation and look forward to your input. Next month, we're going to be getting the request for proposals, the proposals back from that request, and there will be a panel, selection panel of folks that are helping to select the developer by the end of June. That includes us, the Conservancy, Department of General Services, Housing and Community Development, HCD, and then there will be also scoring advice and technical advice provided by the City of South Lake Tahoe, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, El Dorado County, and the Tahoe Prosperity Center. And they're the group, as Jessica mentioned earlier, that created the South Shore Housing Needs Assessment and Housing Action Plan. So we're really looking forward to everybody's input to creating a great selection of a developer that'll be qualified to move forward with this project. That will be announced at the very end of June, we expect. And at that point, the developer will take over doing community outreach, but will be following community engagement guidelines that were included in the RFP. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it back to Jessica.
Great, thank you, Amy. So I wanted to start by providing a foundation by defining what community engagement means to us. So when we think about this project, we know that having community engagement is crucial to ensuring that this project is really successful and it becomes an asset in the community. So we define local community engagement as local community participation in decision making to reflect a diversity of voices, including targeted strategies to engage historically marginalized communities while building transparent processes that encourage engagement. So I just wanted to set that up before we sort of go into what engagement looks like. And as Amy and Kevin mentioned, we are really happy that you're all here. And this is a learning process for us to understand how to best do engagement virtually with all of you, since we're not able to particularly go out to different people and places and really target people. So next we're going to have a pop-up poll that Kevin will send out, and we would like for you to answer so we best understand how to engage you in the next steps of this process.
Thanks, Jessica. So those of you joining via webinar should be seeing the poll pop up here. Launching it now. So we've got 13% participation, and it looks like 65%, 67% prefer focus groups, and 70% prefer email. We'll let this run for a little bit longer. It's still reaching about, seems like 70% of our participants prefer to be communicated through email, and about 65% prefer focus groups. In addition to that, we have about 42% prefer community meetings, and then 27% prefer newsletters. We're about 50% participation in the poll. We'll let it run for a couple more seconds here. All right. Thanks, everyone, for participating in our poll. I'm going to close it out. And we'll continue on with our presentation.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm not sure. All right, so now we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the previous comments that we received about these two parcels at the Y. And I'm not sure everyone can see the slides. Sorry, technical difficulties on my side. I'm not sure if everyone can see the correct slide, Kevin.
Let me see if I can switch it.
Okay. Sorry about that. As you all know, we're all learning a lot of different applications at this point, so just hold tight with us for one quick second.
That should be back on.
Yeah, great, thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please? Perfect, thank you. All right, so what we did is we took a lot of the comments that we received at the December community meeting that Amy spoke about, and we broke it into some categories. I'm not going to be reading all of these. You can look over them. And like Kevin and Amy mentioned previously, we posted this presentation to our website, and a recording will also be posted afterwards. So I'm just going to go on over some of the most popular comments that we heard or that were just repeated over and over again. So we just want to go through those. For the first selection about housing, we heard a lot about the need for different types of housing. And that's basically reflects what the housing needs assessment showed. So there's a need for housing for seniors, workforce development, and varying levels of affordability for both renters and homeowners. The next is to think about how is this potential property going to impact the property values in the surrounding neighborhood. And another piece of that was, why is there a concentration of affordable housing at the Y area? The next was the density of the project. What's it going to look like and how are we going to address that? Next was environment. So there were a lot of comments about the existing drainage issues for that particular area at the Y. And I do want to point out that something that we thought was really great in the RFQ was a lot of the developers really spoke to this, and because the community meetings were included in the RFQ. Next, for transportation, a lot of people talked about the traffic and parking concerns for that particular part of the neighborhood. There was also a need for safer pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. There's a lot of people that are constantly crossing Lake Tahoe Boulevard. We know that there's some bike paths that are close in the area, but there's no real connection from that particular piece of land. So really thinking about how this development could be a centerpiece for connecting to those. And the next slide, please. As for economic development, we heard that a lot of people really wanted some affordable commercial space. This included thinking about how nonprofits could have spaces here or other public spaces so that people could go in and, you know, you could promote more economic development in that area along with the other small businesses that are all in the area. There was also comments about workforce development for living wage jobs. So thinking about what jobs are currently here in the Tahoe region and how are we really thinking about promoting people and creating those career pathways into those jobs. As for the process, a lot of people commented on this particular project and understanding transparency. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we're trying to address that. And a specific example would be through our project requirements that were included in the request for proposals. In our project requirements, those really came out of hearing what the community had to say about that particular area and incorporating that into what the developer has to follow. We really appreciate your input. And so this is one example of the many ways in which we're incorporating community input into our process to ensure that it's more transparent. And we are excited too, because since we had to make everything virtual now, we created a landing page for this project, which you all were able to access this webinar through. And we're putting some resources on that web page as well, and we'll be updating it pretty continuously, so you can feel free to go back and see new updates on there. As for services and amenities, quite a few people said that there's a need for childcare and especially affordable childcare in the area. Next slide, please. A lot of questions really talk about how you know, when we are asking for people to participate at community meetings, what are we doing with that information? Is it just being thrown away after, or are we incorporating it in some way? And I do want to share how we have been including the comments that were provided to us via email, calls, or at the last public meeting into this process. The first is really in our request for proposals and our request for qualifications process, we included the community notes from the December meeting and the one-on-one stakeholder meetings that Amy had mentioned as an attachment, so that the developers, when they received that, they were able to go through those comments one by one and think about how they could provide a development idea around some of those comments. The second is that we wanted to make sure that the 9 developers that Amy spoke about that are going to be submitting their request for proposal were able to go onto this webinar to hear more and address some of those needs and challenges that will come up as a result of this meeting. And the third is the community engagement guidance. Amy spoke a little bit more about this, but the Conservancy developed this guidance that was an attachment for the request for proposal, and it talks about the minimum standards for how the community needs to be engaged once the developer is chosen. So this includes a lot of pieces around community meetings, flyering to ensure that the community is involved throughout the process, a primary contact person that the community can reach with any questions that they may have, and just having that process in place so we see across our asset lands how people are being engaged. And we thought that was really great because a lot of times the community comes back and says, how are we being engaged and where's our input going? And this is a really great way in which the developers can build that trust with the community. And we're also seeing what's going on and how reflective it is of what the community wants. And now I'm going to pass it to Amy.
Hi, again. Thanks, Jessica. I'm going to let you know about next steps and future community engagement. But first, I wanted to clarify one point that I had discussed before. The way that the land will be provided will actually allow for a 99-year ground lease at $1 per year. And that's to help ensure long-term affordability of the project. And so, I just wanted to give you some clarification on that. The community engagement definitely will continue. Jessica and I have both discussed that. But one thing I want to emphasize is the best place to keep finding information is to go to our webpage, which is the Housing Solutions at the South Y page. There is a link from our homepage, and it's the page that you went to get engaged in this meeting and link to this meeting. So updates will be posted there. There's also links there to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram on the bottom of the page. So there are many ways that you can get notifications, and we will continue to be notifying people. There will be a survey that we're going to send out to folks after this meeting, and it's of course optional, but we really appreciate your response if you feel comfortable doing that. It'll help give us more feedback and information besides the questions that we'll be answering today after our presentation. And I do want to emphasize that many of the developers are on today listening, and also they again will be taking over the community outreach process with our guidelines as of July, once a developer is selected. But we're going to stay engaged, and our website will stay up, and we'll keep posting updates. So you can definitely continue to come to our site to find the latest on this project and how you can stay engaged. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amy and Jessica, for that presentation. Looks like we have some good questions that are coming through during the last part of the presentation. And the first question I'd like to direct to Meji at HCD. And the question relates to, so are we planning on making only 50% of the units affordable housing? And would the other 50% of the units be market rate housing? And how does that speak to the state executive order?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Kevin. Thank to the audience who asked it. So the excess sites program is tied to a government code statute, which requires that that there is at least 50% restricted affordable housing on these state sites, and so that is a minimum. You know, we would promote as much affordability as is needed in the local area, but there is an opportunity to have up to 50% market rate units on the site. And so we would really defer to the development community on what might be the most appropriate affordable and market rate mix, as well as what would be financially feasible. But there is an opportunity to provide a wide range of units to meet you know, need at different levels. There is the opportunity to provide middle income workforce housing up to 120% AMI. And so I think there is some real opportunity to meet all of those local needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Our next question I'd like to direct to Department of General Services and John Hine. And the question is, do we have any consultants assisting with the RFP process?
Yes, in Sacramento, we have Lionakis, which is the architectural firm that's helping us on the first group of affordable housing sites. And we have BAE Economics out of Davis is helping us with the financial modeling and the viability of different approaches and mixes of units for the different sites.
Thanks, John. Our next question is I'd like to direct to Amy Rutledge here at the Tahoe Conservancy, and that is, will you be sharing a short list of the developers from the RFQ stage?
If you would like to receive a list of the developers that are on the short list, you should email us. On the screen right now are our emails, and our email contact is also on the web page that you use to connect to the meeting, and we can provide you with that information. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Our next question, let me get through it here. Seems like some people did have a little bit of problem with the poll, but I appreciate your patience on that. And hopefully for our next one, we'll be a little bit better. I think we addressed some of these already. Our next question, this is a good one. Have you, maybe I'll direct this one to Jessica. And it has to do if we have already or if we plan to engage in the future with the Washoe tribe to see if they have any needs and whether on the project and how they could be involved.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. That's a really great question. We have not yet engaged with anyone from the Washoe tribe, but it's something that we're looking towards doing. Like I mentioned previously, we have a pretty lengthy stakeholder list. And so we're going to be moving throughout meeting with each one of those stakeholders to best understand. And as we mentioned before, the developers will also be able to form those relationships. And that's what we're hoping once they take over. But it is our intention to engage them. Thank you.
All right. I'd like to just read in a comment that we received that there's certain members of the public that love the idea of nonprofits or NGOs such as childcare and other services on the site. And then, you know, I guess the further question on that, and I think we'll kind of work through that as we go along in the RFP process, and I'll take this as a comment, is if so, you know, who would people be able to work there and what type of people? So thank you for that comment, and we really appreciate it. Our next comment or question I'll direct to Amy Rutledge, and is this person asks about the different types of LEED or energy efficiency and sustainable measures that may be part of the project requirements or the project site.
Thanks, that's a great question. There are specific standards in the Tahoe Valley Area Plan, which is the community plan that was adopted by the city of South Lake Tahoe for various levels of energy efficiency. And I'd be happy to talk to someone more about the details of that. It goes everything from appliances to windows to potentially solar. Sometimes in Tahoe, that can be challenging, but that can also be implemented. Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the regional plan also has very specific energy efficiency standards. And there also was an executive order issued in California that specifically talks about statewide energy efficiency standards. And so details on that, I'm happy to provide if someone wants to email me, but that's an overview.
Thanks, Amy. Our next question, I'll go ahead and just field it. Has to do with how many acres of hard coverage comes with a large property development. At this time, the Conservancy is only providing the base allowable coverage on the property. We want to work with the developers to understand their needs, and any future desires on coverage as well as hard coverage would, in addition to seeking sale of that coverage, would be provided at fair market value and subject to our board approval. I will remind that there is a potential for developers to use some of the bonus units available at TRPA for residential units, as well as, yeah, that's it. And then if the developer were seeking any additional coverage also from the city, it would also need to go through the board at the city of South Lake Tahoe. Let's see here. So maybe our next question I'll direct to John Heim at the Department of General Services. As if we were able to get a developer in June, what is the time frame for building the project?
The governor's executive order is looking to find projects that can be constructed in the near term, the shortest term possible. We'd like to see projects that can be groundbreaking within 2 years. Because this site is in Lake Tahoe and we have the snow to contend with, there is some flexibility in that. And part of the RFP is for the developers to submit their proposed schedule of how they plan on delivering the project that they've scoped out. So it fits within the request of the executive order in light of the fact that we have a high mountain community and the weather situation. I hope that helps.
Thanks, John. Our next question I'll direct towards Amy Rutledge, and it has to do with the type of project that may go on the site. This person is asking, have we decided what type of facilities would be included in the building plans, or is it up to the developers?
That's a really great question. So it's actually somewhat of a mix, because we certainly didn't want to predetermine how this project would look before there was a balance of feasibility, economic feasibility, and a developer that was willing and able to implement a project. And also, we really wanted to get everybody's input from the community before we determined it. But we do have guidelines that are attached to the request for proposal, and they were also attached to the request for qualifications that basically follow the community plan requirements for mixed use housing. So there could be some retail and commercial mixed in. There could be nonprofit uses like affordable daycare and other nonprofit uses. There could be artist or maker space. All these things have been discussed. They're all allowed. So basically, whatever is allowed under the current zoning, both the regional plan and the community plan, and then really what's encouraged in town centers, which is sustainable development. So we've talked about trail connections. We've talked about connections to transit. We've talked about pedestrian connections to the high school and other local businesses, so it's easier for residents from the whole community to be able to get there. One thing to note is there's a variety of pedestrian trails on these properties currently, and we've actually requested that the project continue to provide those pedestrian paths for folks, because we figure if you're already using them, it probably makes sense to be there because you're getting somewhere you want to go on those paths. And also there's a lot of open space use of these parcels by the surrounding neighborhoods, and we want to be able to provide that use continuing forward. So part of our project guidance is to require open space be provided for the community, that those open spaces are then permanently protected via a legal document to the Conservancy, and that we would manage public access to those areas via that legal document, which is called a conservation easement. So that would be for sensitive areas of the property, for environmentally sensitive areas, and also for public use areas. So we're excited to try and provide community amenities as well as economic development for the Y to increase overall quality of life. And that's our goal.
Thanks, Amy. Our next question I'll direct to Meji at HCD. The question is, there are a number of references to MHP in the request for proposals. Is there a strong desire to use that program, and for what particular reason?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the HCD has evaluated what sort of resources we could contribute to this project. We have considered doing an MHP set-aside, that is a multifamily housing program. It's one of our largest, most utilized programs in our department. Sorry, there's a fire truck going by right now. And you know, we have opened that up as an opportunity to help make these projects financially feasible. At the same time, given the current COVID situation, resources are limited, and we would actually encourage developers to assess other funding opportunities, be creative. MHP is a very competitive program, and if we can preserve those funds for other affordable housing, that would be ideal. And so we're not necessarily promoting the use of it. We are just exploring the opportunity to have a set aside. Again, just trying to tie it back to what would be financially feasible here. If you have additional questions kind of specific to MHP, I can answer those as well.
Thanks, Meji. The next question is as it relates to the site itself, and I think I'll direct this one to Amy Rutledge. The question is, do we have a map of the trails in environmentally sensitive areas on the parcels in AutoCAD? I'll kind of hand it over to you, Amy.
Yes. So the short answer is yes. We have done a land capability verification with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which is the official way to determine which areas of a property are developable and which class of land is located on properties. So actually the 1029 Tata Lane property is 100% Class 7 developable land. The 1860 Lake Tahoe Boulevard parcel has a certain amount. It's a swath of sensitive land that is, it basically runs from Julie Lane down to Lake Tahoe Boulevard, and the sort of quote front part of the parcel that fronts on Lake Tahoe Boulevard. I could provide that specific information to somebody if they want to email me. I'm happy to do that. It's public information, and I believe it's also posted on Tahoe Regional Planning Agency's website under the parcel. So there's a parcel search feature on their website, and you can find it that way, but I'm very happy to help provide that. As far as existing trails go, we have required that any developer, when they're doing a site design, accommodates the existing trail paths. It may not be exactly where they are now, but the idea is to figure out where those paths are going, what the utility of them is, and then to preserve that utility through the site. And as often as possible to preserve where they actually are. So that mapping would take place when the developer is doing the site design, and we would be coordinating closely with them, but that's in our project guidance.
Thanks, Amy. I'm currently not seeing any additional questions from the public on any of the presentation or the project. So we'll just kind of hold tight for a couple, maybe not minutes, but a few seconds to see if anyone has additional questions from the public. I do have one comment from the public that they do enjoy the idea of maintaining the open space as much as possible. And then how we may try to maintain that through different types of units and building up versus down. So I think we'll take that as a comment and appreciate the comments. And I also will kind of mention that we do, I am monitoring questions, and if you don't feel like your question has been fully answered, we'll be kind of posting some of these comments and questions on our website. Just monitoring some of the questions and comments right now, and as a reminder of stakeholders, if they want to kind of reach out to us about the presentation or any additional questions on the project, we encourage you to visit our website, tahoe.ca.gov, and on there's a landing page for the project. In addition to that, the presentation today included contact information for Jessica and Amy Rutledge here at the Conservancy. So I think I'm not seeing any additional comments or questions at this time. So I'm going to say thank you to the public for joining us today for our first virtual community engagement meeting about our affordable housing here on the South Shore. We want to remind you after the meeting today, there'll be an opportunity to fill out a survey that will be sent out to you, to all participants today. And we want to say thank you for your time and appreciate everyone's participation today in a great community meeting. Thanks again, and stay healthy and stay safe. Thanks, everyone.